So if I told you to go to a local restaurant tonight, walk up to the host, ask for a table for one, and just sit there by yourself for an hour.
Oh, man.
Right. And you can't look at your phone. You just have to stare at the wall.
Honestly, for a lot of people, that sounds like a nightmare.
It really does. I mean, your brain would probably register that exact scenario as a literal threat. Your heart rate would spike just thinking about it.
Oh, absolutely. It triggers a very real, genuine physiological stress response.
Because culturally, we are just terrified of our own company. We tend to assume anyone sitting alone is like isolated or sad or they've been rejected.
Yeah, we've entirely blurred the lines between just being alone and actually being isolated.
Yeah.
And because of that blur, we just spend our days running back to the constant
The
noise.
notifications, the emails.
Exactly, the social obligations. Even when we are completely exhausted by them, we run back to them.
Well, that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We are pulling from a really compelling piece in Psychology Today. It's called How Solitude Supports Mental Health.
It's a great piece.
It really is. And the whole article centers around this detailed interview with the poet and author Maggie Smith.
Right.
So the mission for you, the listener, as we go through all this material today, is to definitively separate that painful, involuntary feeling of loneliness from the highly empowering, active state of solitude.
Because they're very different things.
Completely different. We're going to break down the actual psychological mechanics of how you can use intentional alone time to gain self-insight rather than just, using it as a place to hide from the world.
And I think that's huge. Because for anyone listening who naturally craves quiet time, but maybe you feel this lingering guilt about
Which
it.
you're being antisocial.
Right, like
Yeah.
you worry you're detached or avoiding people.
Yeah.
The psychological consensus is actually the exact opposite. The ability to sit with oneself without external distraction is a fundamental building block of long-term mental wellness.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, though, because I'm struggling with the baseline distinction here. If loneliness and solitude look exactly the same from the outside, like it's literally just a person sitting in a quiet room by themselves, how does the brain actually know the difference?
That's the core question, isn't it?
Yeah, like why does one feel like a punishment and the other feels like a vacation?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the difference lies entirely in your neurological perception of autonomy.
Autonomy. Okay.
Yeah. The article highlights this 2021 study by Weinstein and colleagues, and they look specifically at this exact mechanism.
Yeah.
When you choose to be alone, your prefrontal cortex,
That's the decision-making part of the brain, right?
exactly, the executive function center, it signals to your nervous system that you are in control. It registers the environment as perfectly safe.
Oh, I see.
So that choice is what turns being alone into solitude. The study actually found that when alone time is intentional, it consistently brings this profound sense of inner peace, and it improves emotion regulation across a person's entire lifespan.
So it's fundamentally about the lock on the door.
I like that. How do you mean?
Like loneliness is the panic of feeling like someone locked you in a room from the outside. You're trapped, you can't get out.
Yes.
But solitude is the exact same physical room, but your nervous system is calm because you're the one who walked in, turned the deadbolt from the inside, and you literally have the key in your pocket.
That physical analogy maps perfectly onto the psychology, really perfectly, because when you turn that deadbolt yourself, you are actively stripping away the performative layers you have to wear when interacting with other people.
The masks we wear, basically.
Exactly. You don't have to manage anyone else's emotional state. You don't have to read facial expressions. You don't even have to monitor your own tone of voice.
Which is exhausting to do all day.
It is. And the Weinstein study points out that older adults actually tend to be incredibly adept at this
Really? Why is that?
because they've had decades of practice navigating social performances.
Mhm.
So they're often much better at deliberately dropping the performance, utilizing that locked room to just foster well-being and engage in creative thought.
Okay, and this is a big thing, but that study assumes you actually had the power to turn the lock.
Right.
What happens to your emotional regulation when that door is locked from the outside? Because, let's be honest, life doesn't always ask for our permission before isolating us.
No, it certainly doesn't.
What happens when solitude isn't some weekend yoga retreat you booked for yourself, but a permanent new reality that just gets thrust on you?
Yeah, that is the collision point between clinical psychology and just the messy reality of the human experience. When the choice is removed, your amygdala, the brain's fear center, takes over.
And that's when the panic sets in.
Exactly. That's when you experience the painful state of loneliness instead of solitude.
Which brings us right to the core narrative of the article, because Maggie Smith went through this massive life transition that forced her into a quiet room she definitely didn't choose.
Right, a major unmooring.
Yeah. In her early 40s, she went through a completely devastating divorce. And she had been with her ex-husband since her early 20s.
That's a long time.
That's 2 full decades of her adult life where her entire sense of self was completely anchored to that relationship. So finding herself single again left her feeling totally, quote, unmoored. But then in her writing, Smith reflects that this specific, really painful unmooring gave her the forced opportunity to take responsibility for her own life.
Which is a huge perspective shift.
It is. She actually describes that unmoored state as the perfect emotional weather for writing poems.
You know, the phrasing perfect emotional weather is incredibly precise.
How so?
Well, think about weather. Weather implies something atmospheric, it's largely out of your control, and is often really turbulent.
Right, like a storm.
Exactly. But storms are also what clear the air and completely alter the landscape.
Okay, to help you, the listener, understand that turbulence, think about the physical mechanics of carrying a massively heavy backpack.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
If you've worn a heavy pack every single day for 20 years, it's not just that your back hurts. Your body has fundamentally adapted to that weight. Your muscles unconsciously lean forward to compensate for the pull on your shoulders.
Right, your whole posture changes.
Yes. And when you suddenly take the backpack off, yes, you feel lighter, but your muscle memory is completely thrown off. You don't know how to walk without it.
You're off balance.
Exactly. If you try to take a normal step, you'll literally fall backward because the weight you were balancing against is just gone.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that physical imbalance is exactly what psychologists call an anchored identity.
Anchored identity.
Yeah. So much of our self-concept is subconsciously defined by the people we factor into our daily lives. You know, I am this person's partner, I am this person's parent, I am this person's reliable coworker.
We define ourselves by our relationships to others.
Exactly. Your brain builds a structural center of gravity around those exact relationships.
Yeah.
So when you remove the primary anchor, the self feels like it is just drifting in open water.
Which is terrifying.
It's terrifying. But this transition Smith went through demonstrates this vital psychological mechanism.
Yeah.
You cannot build a new center of gravity until the old one is entirely removed.
Wow.
The painful unmooring is the actual prerequisite for rebuilding.
I hear you. I hear you about the unmooring being necessary, but let's be real for a second.
Okay.
If someone is actively grieving a 20-year marriage or the sudden loss of a career, telling them to just embrace the unmooring and find a new center of gravity sounds impossibly abstract.
It sounds like a cliche, yeah.
Right. If you are suddenly adrift and you're no longer anchored to a partner or a job, what exactly are you supposed to anchor to?
Well, the answer Smith explores in her work, and it's also a core tenet of trauma recovery, is the physical self.
The body.
The body. When all those external relationships and social labels are just stripped away, the only absolute constant remaining is the biological vessel you inhabit.
They discuss this a lot through the lens of Smith's newest poetry collection. It's titled A Suit or a Suitcase.
Such a brilliant title.
It is. The book tracks how her body has been with her through every distinct life stage: childhood, young adulthood, new motherhood, and middle age. She uses the writing to have this ongoing conversation with herself about how the body actually contains the self.
And emphasizing that the body contains the self is a crucial therapeutic shift.
Because usually we try to escape it.
Exactly. In times of extreme emotional distress or deep loneliness, the human instinct is to dissociate. We want to float away from that physical discomfort in our chest or our stomach.
Right, like treating the mind and the body as entirely separate entities.
Yes. But Smith is insisting on their unity, which is a form of somatic grounding.
Wait, I need to challenge that idea just a little bit.
Go for it.
Isn't focusing on your body during a moment of deep loneliness or, say, a panic attack going to make things infinitely worse?
How do you mean?
Well, if I'm alone in an empty house and my chest is tight and my heart is racing, focusing on my physical body seems like it would just amplify the panic.
Ah, I see what you're saying. And yes, it amplifies the panic if you focus purely on the acute symptom.
Oh, okay.
But that is where Smith's title, A Suit or a Suitcase, provides a totally different psychological framework. She isn't asking you to focus on the elevated heart rate. She's asking you to focus on the historical continuity of the body itself.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's break down that title because the dichotomy she sets up is just brilliant.
It really is.
It asks a direct question about how you view your physical form. Is your body a suit? Meaning, is it a tailored, pristine garment that you put on to project a specific flawless image to the outside world?
Right.
Or is your body a suitcase? Is it this deeply utilitarian, functional object that gets scuffed up, dented, and covered in travel stickers as it carries all of your internal baggage, your memories, and your survival mechanisms through the different eras of your life?
I love that. Because a suit implies an audience.
Yes.
It implies performance,
Yeah.
which is exactly what we established earlier, that we are trying to escape when we enter true solitude.
We want to take the suit off.
Exactly. But a suitcase implies a journey. By viewing the body as a suitcase, you completely reframe your relationship with your physical self.
Those scuffs and dents aren't flaws.
No, they aren't flaws in the suit. They are proof of distance traveled.
Mm-hmm.
And for anyone navigating a period of isolation or a major life transition, grounding your identity in that physical presence is profoundly stabilizing.
Because it's the one thing that hasn't left you.
Precisely. Everything else around you might be fluid or missing entirely, but that physical suitcase has literally survived every single worst day you have ever had. It holds the complete unbroken timeline of your survival.
Okay, so the physical body provides the structural anchor in the quiet room.
Right.
But let's look at what's actually happening inside the room. You're alone, you're breathing, you're grounded in your body as a suitcase. But your mind is still racing. The quiet room is full of deafening, chaotic thoughts. If you're naturally extroverted, or you're someone who processes things by talking them out with friends, sitting alone with your thoughts probably sounds less like peaceful solitude and more like a polite euphemism for overthinking yourself into a spiral.
That's a very common experience.
Yeah.
The removal of external noise does not automatically mute the internal noise.
Usually the opposite, right?
Exactly. In fact, the sudden lack of environmental discretion makes the internal dialogue seem overwhelmingly loud. The brain, lacking external stimuli to process, turns its analytical machinery inward. And that can easily lead to rumination if you don't have a mechanism to handle it.
And the article pivots right here to Smith's highly specific method for managing that internal noise. There's a poem of hers mentioned called Full, and the ending lines encapsulate this perfectly.
I love this poem.
Me too. She writes, "Now that I have no other mind to which I might apply my own, I polish it to near shining. Thoughts come away cleaner and cleaner. If I lean close enough, I can see my reflection."
Wow. You know, the phrase, no other mind to which I might apply my own, isolates the exact challenge and the opportunity of solitude.
The lack of other people.
Right. Because in daily life, we constantly outsource our emotional regulation to other minds.
Oh, totally. We tell a friend a story to see if they react with anger or sympathy, and then we use their reaction to calibrate our own feelings.
Exactly. But in solitude, you lose that external calibration. It is just you and the raw thought.
And Smith's approach to dealing with those raw thoughts is really surprising. She points out that she doesn't keep a daily journal, and she doesn't write purely for the sake of, like, healing therapy.
Right.
When her mind is relentlessly chewing on a problem, just turning a single thought over and over, her instinct isn't to just sit there and meditate on it. She picks up a pen to give those thoughts a definitive form, a container.
A container, yes.
Giving the thoughts a container is what she finds clarifying. She might write one poem at a time over the course of 5 whole years. And she often only discovers what a book is actually about years later, by looking back and seeing the themes she was unconsciously obsessing over.
This raises an important point about cognitive tools. Creating a container is highly effective, and it's rooted in a psychological concept called affect labeling.
Affect labeling.
Yeah. When an anxiety or a complex thought is just bouncing around inside your head, your brain processes it as an abstract, infinite threat. The amygdala stays highly active because the boundaries of the problem are totally undefined.
Because you can't see the edges of it.
Exactly. But by forcing that thought into a container, by writing it down, speaking it aloud, or shaping it into a narrative, you force the prefrontal cortex to translate abstract emotional data into concrete language.
And that helps.
That translation process literally dampens the fear response in the brain.
It's the exact same mechanism as tackling a junk drawer in your kitchen.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. If you just keep aggressively shoving random bills, batteries, and loose screws into the drawer and slamming it shut, it becomes this terrifying, jammed-up mess. The anxiety of knowing the mess is in there just grows.
Out of sight, but Definitely not out of mind.
Exactly. Giving your thoughts a container isn't about just staring at the closed drawer. It's about pulling the drawer all the way out and dumping the entire mess onto the kitchen table under bright light. You
Yes.
can't regulate the chaos until you see all the individual pieces laid out. Only then can you start sorting the screws into a jar and the batteries into a box. The raw materials haven't disappeared, but the chaos is neutralized because everything now has a physical boundary.
And, the listener might be hearing this and thinking, well, that works perfectly for someone who writes books for a living, but I'm not a professional poet.
Right, I can't write a poem to save my life.
Exactly. But the crucial takeaway is that the container doesn't require artistic mastery. Smith happens to use poetry to build her containers. You might use a structured bulleted list in a notebook.
Or like a voice memo.
A 10-minute voice memo on your phone while driving is a great container. You might physically sketch out a mind map on a whiteboard. The aesthetic quality of the container doesn't matter at all.
It's just about getting it out of your head.
The psychological relief comes entirely from the act of externalization. You're taking the racing thought, stepping completely outside of it, and giving it rigid shape. That is the polishing she describes in the poem. You wipe away the abstract anxiety until you can clearly see your own reflection in the underlying logic of the thought.
It fundamentally shifts your role. You stop being the victim trapped in the room with your racing thoughts, and you become the architect actively building boxes to store them in.
Beautifully put.
But okay, if we follow that logic to its end, it introduces a new problem.
It's that.
If we anchor ourselves in the physical body and we spend all our time beautifully polishing our thoughts and putting them into neat containers, don't we run the risk of just staying in that room forever? Like, doesn't perfect solitude eventually just morph back into isolation?
It absolutely can. If the process stops there, yes. Solitude as a permanent retreat is avoidance. It's not wellness. The psychological framework we're discussing here requires a final outward step.
And the interviewer actually asks Smith about this. They ask what she ultimately hopes readers take away from spending time with her books. And her answer completely reframes the purpose of all this solitary work.
It really brings it full circle.
It does. She views her published books as a message in a bottle. She says that when she takes all these containers she built in private and tosses them into the waves, she has absolutely no control over what happens next.
Not at all.
She doesn't know what shore the bottle will wash up on, or when it will arrive, or what the person who finds it will even think of it.
And relinquishing that control is incredibly liberating. She understands that the private work is done, and now the reader gets to have their own distinct, autonomous relationship with the text.
Which is the beauty of it.
Yeah. She mentions that her own worldview is constantly challenged, stretched, and changed by the authors she reads. Her hope is simply to provide that same catalyst for someone else.
So what does this all mean for you? The ultimate synthesis for you, as you navigate your own need for space, is that genuine solitude is never about permanently shutting the world out. Building a fortress to keep people away is just a self-imposed prison sentence.
It's just another locked room.
Exactly. True solitude takes courage. It is the willingness to walk into the quiet room, untangle your identity from the expectations of the people around you, and do the hard work of giving your chaotic thoughts a manageable shape.
Which is not easy work.
Not at all. But the process is only complete when you take what you've learned in the quiet and cast it back out into the noise. The insight you gain alone is what allows you to connect with others on a much deeper, more authentic frequency when you finally unlock the door and walk back outside.
Precisely. Solitude is the required prerequisite for genuine connection. You can't fully share yourself with the world until you've endured the unmooring required to figure out who that self actually is.
Maggie Smith didn't know the overarching theme of her own life until she looked back at 5 years of individual, isolated poems and finally recognized her own hidden obsessions sitting there in plain sight. So I want to leave you with this thought. If you were to gather all of your stray thoughts, your impulsive text messages, your late-night voice memos, and those scattered Notes app entries from the past 5 years, and you dumped all of them onto the table to build one single container, what would the title of your book be? And what hidden obsessions would it reveal about you?